Our very special guest is Robert Cornegy, Councilman from Brooklyn. This is his second appearance. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
Thank you, Greg.
I would like to begin our discussion with the New York City Housing Authority and your thoughts on all that's happening and not happening in public housing. The chairwoman, Shola Olateya, just announced that she's going to have this, I would say, planned NYCHA for the future. And a lot of the NYCHA plan rests on this program called RAD. That's a rental assistance program with the federal government. And I looked into that program, and I know in the past in other cities, that program has, yes, it does supply money in Section 8, but after a period of time, 10 years or so, those apartments that are on that rental assistance RAD program become market value apartments. And in some cases, the tenants have been evicted because you bring in a third-party landlord, and I believe that's just opening the door for privatization.
Well, first of all, I want to say I give you 100% credit for pronouncing Shola's name correctly. There should be some award for that. I always mess that up. But yeah, I think a lot of people are very concerned, including myself, who has 21 developments in my district, and understand that NYCHA is really the last bastion of affordable housing in the city of New York. So any movement towards privatization, whether it's over a period of time, whether it's quick, really is alarming. You know, families, I grew up in a time when families were housed in the NYCHA developments. And some of the best people I know come out of NYCHA developments and would not have had the ability to live in some of these great neighborhoods that the city has to offer if it wasn't for NYCHA developments. And I think that there's a subtle, very, very subtle movement away from the ability for families to stay there. And potentially this program as it stands could contribute to that. So I'm very concerned.
Yeah, because like I said, I'm going to brief the city council because we're putting together some papers, and I'm going to make sure that each city council member gets a copy of what we put together. But in cities like, take San Francisco, they completely privatized those developments. And the residents that were there, they said this is a program to help them. Yes, it's helping them to be in the beginning. But over a period of time, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, there are high evictions, there's harassment, because these programs, these apartments now become market rate. And I don't think that the Mayor de Blasio really understands what this program is going to lead to.
But I think, you know, just to play devil's advocate for a second, I think that the development of NYCHA developments were attempted to some degree to be a bridge across for families. So some families during a period of time, whether it was returning from the war, whether it was a segue into home ownership, right? And a very small portion of people actually benefited
from the beginning.
From the beginning, yeah, clearly decades ago.
Yes.
And so I think in some people's minds, they'd like to see a movement back towards that. Not myself, because generations have benefited from that method of affordable housing. But I think there are some people, again, playing devil's advocate, who say that this was only supposed to be a stopgap measure to some degree to move families into home ownership. However, in places like Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights, where I represent, the entree into home ownership is not for the faint of heart, let's say. I purchased my house in 2004 for $450,000, which is nothing to sneeze at, but it's now valued at 1.8. So who can come in at 1.8? Right. Certainly not a former NYCHA resident.
Sure.
So I think even if you agreed with the former way that NYCHA developments were set aside to be a bridge across, that doesn't stand to reason today that could be. And
even if it's a bridge across, somebody moves out, somebody needs to move in.
Absolutely.
And it has to be there for the next person to move in.
Excellent point.
So even if we're thinking we just want to keep moving people on, somebody needs to start.
Right. The next person coming in certainly wouldn't be in that same absolutely. So I think the city, the mayor has been quoted several times in mentioning, a tale of two cities. I'm not sure, I agree with you. I don't know if the administration understands the seriousness of implementing a program such as that.
Yeah, and you look at the next generation NYCHA. There are people there that say, what about this generation? Right. Using apps to schedule repairs, look at repairs. Senior citizens don't have cell phones, smartphones. They don't know how to operate those things.
Yes, sir.
They're not going to go on the computer. So there's a generation that's living there now that needs to be taken care of.
Oh, not to mention that also the seniors are being pushed to downsize in ways that for some of them is unfathomable, right? So we have that as a situation in my district. We also have a situation where they're looking to raise commercial space leases in NYCHA developments to market value. So the whole thing, and not to mention parking spaces, which will quadruple in cost. So all of this, so one of these things in and of themselves is a movement away from the basis for NYCHA. But when you compile all of them, that's a recipe for disaster, clearly.
And now we found out the comptroller, Scott Stringer, just did an audit on NYCHA, and he found that there were roughly 2,300 vacant apartments in NYCHA, and they have been vacant for quite some time.
So to keep it local, myself and NYCHA are debating. There is a vacant police station in the Marcy houses, which hasn't had a community center for 3 decades. And I'm actually in a fight with them to secure that property for a community center. And they're saying that they want to use those 2 apartments to put them back on the rent roll. And I'm like, that's absolutely ridiculous. When you could use the space for 300 families, to use them for 2 families doesn't make much sense. So we actually are in an ongoing discussion as to whether or not that space, which has been vacant, the old police station there has been vacant for at least 2 decades, to put it back on the rent roll. So some of the mentality and the thinking behind what's going on at NYCHA puzzles council members like myself.
Well, thinking or not thinking, but let me hear your plan to use that space. Say NYCHA said, okay, we're going to give you that. What's the rent? Can you meet the rent?
Yeah, well, certainly we could meet the rent. I could some of my discretionary funding. Certainly, we're willing to set aside capital funds also for the build out, but discretionary funding to make sure that the center operates in a way that not necessarily goes to a third party operator, but operates in the same model that NYCHA centers, both youth and senior centers have operated in the past, which is through residents operating the facility. So we'd like to stick with that model. So that's another discussion.
That sounds good. So take me through your plan for your youth center. So
my plan would be that we do a build out on it. We'll get an estimate. So we went and looked at that particular facility, and then there's another facility. They took us to 3 different spaces. What we'd like to do is be able to go in. That's the only. So here's the funny thing. That's the only center that that's the only space that they showed us that's above ground. The other 2 spaces are in the basement of NYCHA facilities, which we know are not conducive because of not only one of those centers was moved out because of asbestos. So we're concerned about the air quality and those kinds of things. Yeah. So the one we really want to go into is the only one above ground. So what we would do is go in, use capital funding to do the build out on the center. And then through myself, Nydia Velasquez, who's the congressperson, and federal dollars would combine to do the build out and also combine to fund the center to operate going forward. So it's very simple. And the borough president. So between the city council, the federal government, and the borough president's office, we would be able to come up with the resources, not only to do the build out, but also to fund the operation of the facility.
That sounds like a no-brainer. How many kids would that?
At least 300. At least 300 families.
So I was going to. That's very good. We were going to talk about crime in NYCHA.
And that's an excellent segue to that.
That would go a long way to reducing crime in NYCHA. It would give the youth a lot to do. I guess you would have computers and
absolutely the whole full range of what's accessible in centers now. We had an early on discussion with Shola about other facilities that are in close proximity, and I was able to, through her and through the precinct commander for PSA, explain to her that the young people in Marcy, even though Tompkins is literally across the street, cannot frequent that center because of rivalries and because of the gun violence that's taking place between the two centers. And while I think one of her first goals was to begin to consolidate the facilities that were close by. And in theory, that's a great theory. If you have underutilized facilities, put them together potentially. But the circumstances that we're in, at least in Bedford-Stuyvesant, where one group can't go into another group's territory, for lack of a better term, even if they're innocent bystanders, even if they're young children who have no gang involvement, have found themselves victims when placed in a situation that's out of their particular environments, even if it's in close proximity. So we've made a case, a very good case, for having a center in Marcy, even though Tompkins development, which is in close proximity, has one. So we are ready, literally ready to go. I've had discussions already with the borough president's office. Nydia Velasquez, the congresswoman for that area, is in 100%. So it seems like a no-brainer. We have this one barrier, which is the fact that that particular facility, which we've identified, which they showed me, which we've identified, they're now going back kind of on what their commitment was, and now want to use it for 2 apartments.
Well, I think you should press them on that issue, and
we were there last week.
Bring that up and try to assist you
Please.
in that, because our members who work in NYCHA would love to see community centers there and would love to see the crime being reduced. I'm sorry, that's all the time we have for this segment. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237. Our very special guest was Councilman Robert Cornegy, Brooklyn. We're going to ask him to come back because he has a lot to say, and we want to listen to what he has to say.
I keep forgetting how quick this goes, Greg. Thank you for having me.
So that's why we got to have you back.